In this video, we'll be going over some of the worst patches throughout the history of WoW, moving from those that were somewhat controversial within subsections of the community all the way down to catastrophic for the majority of players. First up at number 10 is patch 1.12 Drums of War, which released August 22nd, 2006. Since this was the last major content patch implemented before WoW's first expansion, the Burning Crusade, Team 2 actually settled on using this version of the game as a foundation for building classic WoW, due to it representing the most stable state of vanilla WoW. The patch itself centered around PvP, introducing world PvP objectives like capturing towers and resources in Silithus and Eastern Plaguelands for buffs and rewards, as well as cross-realm functionality for the Alterac Valley, Warsong Gulch, and Arathi Basin battlegrounds. Additionally, the patch included a significant revamp for rogue talents, as well as balance changes for druids, hunters, mages, paladins, priests, shamans, warlocks, and warriors, along with some further general bug fixes and quality of life improvements as well. Now, the reason this patch makes the list, however, is mostly due to the introduction of cross-realm battlegrounds, and the slippery slope effect that some players feel that this caused. By linking Alterac Valley, Warsong Gulch, and Arathi Basin across multiple servers, Blizzard intended to create a larger matchmaking pools and reduce queue times. This was a technical milestone at the time, but the change did also lead to some players feeling like this was a major shift in the social fabric of the game. Prior to the change, battlegrounds were server-specific, meaning players would often fight against or alongside the same names, building rivalries and friendships in the process. But with cross-realm queues, that sense of community was kind of lost. That said, there are many redeeming qualities for patch 1.12. This wasn't a buggy mess, content drought, or failed climax to an entire expansion. It's simply a polarizing moment in WoW's history for some of the player base, and that's why it only makes number 10 on this list. And at number 9, we have patch 7.3.5, Scaling, Legion's fourth medium patch, which released January 16th, 2018. The major feature of this patch was, as the name suggests, to introduce Legion's level scaling to every single other zone within Kalimdor, Eastern Kingdoms, Outland, Northrend, Pandaria, and Draenor, as well as all of the corresponding dungeons. This meant that players could now quest in almost any zone or expansion they wanted, and in any order with mobs and rewards scaling to their level regardless, which was a welcome change as leveling alt had grown very stale for long-term players by the time Legion came out, because zones used to have a strict level range which players had to follow in a predetermined order. In addition to scaling though, the patch also added a new battleground, Seething Shore, which was tied to Azerite and teased upcoming story elements from Battle for Azeroth. Story quests around the aftermath of Sargeras stabbing his sword into Silithus were also added, setting up the next expansion. And finally, Ulduar time walking and some legendary item changes were also implemented as well. The reason this patch makes this list is because the scaling system was actually quite divisive though. While many praised the new freedom to quest their zones in whatever order you wanted, mobs now felt a bit bullet spongy. Leveling itself had slowed down dramatically, with the sense of progression now feeling extremely diminished, which was quite the whiplash considering we were coming out of Legion, the ultimate power fantasy expansion. This was also made worse due to a number of players experiencing new, sudden frame rate drops and UI bugs post-patch. And on top of that, the patch was extremely light on new content, so there was barely anything to do. And at number 8, we have patch 7.1.5, Class Tuning, Legion's second medium patch, which released January 6, 2017. This patch mainly involved the Fun Police, a complete overhaul to class balance, with nearly every class and spec being affected by sweeping adjustments. Shadow Priests, for instance, found their Void form now only increase shadow damage by 20% instead of 30%. New micro-holidays were also added, such as Hatching of the Hippogriffs and Spring Balloon Festival, designed to add flavor without any major rewards. The patch also marked a return for the Brawlers Guild with new solo boss fights and rewards such as Ogre Watch, Ray D Tier, and the Brawler's Burly Basilisk Mount. And finally, it added Mista Pandaria time walking and a visual update to Blade's Edge Arena. The class changes of this patch were very unpopular, with many players logging in to suddenly find their class nerfed or reworked mid-expansion, disrupting raid balance, PvP metas, and personal playstyles. For example, marksmanship hunters had their vulnerable mechanic completely reworked, which in essence gutted their smooth rotation and forced a much clunkier, proc-dependent one instead. And warlocks found themselves being funneled by Blizzard towards using soul effigy, despite the majority of them hating the ability. Ultimately, when combined with the fact that this patch was, again, fairly content light, it created the impression that Blizzard were tinkering for the sake of tinkering rather than delivering actual meaningful changes. And at number 7, we have patch 5.1 Landfall, the first major content patch for Mists of Pandaria, released on November 27, 2012. With this patch came the beginning of the Pandaren campaign, introducing a daily quest hub for each faction in the Krasarang Wild Zone, although with 2 new reputations, Operation Shieldwall for Alliance and the Dominance Offensive for Horde. As players gained reputation, they unlocked cutscenes and heavy lore quests featuring faction leaders like Varian Wren of the Alliance, Vol'jin of the Darkspear Trolls, and Garrosh Hellscream, War Chief of the Horde at the time. The patch also introduced the Brawlers Guild for the first time, a new solo PvE feature allowing players to fight unique bosses in an underground fight club. More scenarios were added, continuing the experimental story delivery system introduced in Mists of Pandaria. And finally, pet battles were updated with the new inclusion of pet stones as well. The reason patch 5.1 makes this list is due to the particularly grindy nature of the new daily content. There were 4 different quest hubs: Bilgewater Beach, Domination Point, Lion's Landing, and Ruins of Ogudai, with only 1 hub available offering 5 daily quests for a grand total of 900 rep per day. The quests themselves were basically just different variations of kill, delivery, or gathering quests, so they got old pretty fast. Not to mention that MoP was already overloaded with daily grinds for factions, such as Golden Lotus, Calaxy, and the August Celestials. So adding even more grinds made 5.1 feel like Blizzard were doubling down on that approach. Many players just straight up burnt out very quickly, feeling like they were being forced to log in every single day to avoid falling behind. On top of that, the new story quests were reputation gated, causing frustration for those who were enjoying the story, but didn't particularly want to do chores every day just to experience it. And next up at number 6, we have patch 2.2, aka Voice Chat. Released September 25th, 2007 as part of the Burning Crusade expansion, a new built-in voice chat feature became available in-game for the first time, allowing players to join voice channels and groups and raids directly through the WoW client. There was also an improved chat interface, giving players better channel controls, Mac movie capture integration, letting Mac users record in-game footage natively, and a number of class, profession, and item tweaks as well. However, the in-game voice chat is renowned for being absolutely terrible. Not only was it low quality, but it lacked a lot of core features that third-party tools like Vent and TeamSpeak already offered. Tools which the majority of WoW players were already widely using anyway, so ultimately most guilds just completely ignored the new feature entirely. Players had expected something more substantial, with new dungeons, new raids, and new story progression, but what they got was a useless feature that no one asked for. And coming after the massive 2.1 Black Temple patch, this felt like a massive letdown. And next, at number 5, patch 4.1, Rise of the Zandalari, the first major content patch for Cataclysm, released on April 26, 2011. Zul'Gurub and Zul'Aman were revamped and reintroduced as level 85 5-man dungeons with updates to mechanics, loot, and achievements. As well as this, we got the Dungeon Finder facility, which streamlined queuing for random dungeons. Guilds got new weekly challenge tasks and dungeons, raids, and raided battlegrounds, which groups could tackle for additional guild experience, achievements, and gold. And on top of all that, class changes like Death Knight's Raise Ally ability being revamped into a proper battle res, as well as general UI and bug fixes. The reason 4.1 makes this list is mainly due to the headline feature of Zul'Aman and Zul'Gurub being recycled. Most of the community felt kinda cheated, especially since Cataclysm had already been criticized for lacking any fresh or innovative endgame content anyway. Unlike most major patches, 4.1 did not even include a raid tier, which left raiders with nothing to do until patch 4.2 in June of 2011. So this patch very much felt like filler to a large chunk of the player base, and reinforced the opinion that Cataclysm's overall content was pretty thin. And at number 4, we have patch 9.1, Chains of Domination, the first content patch of Shadowlands, released June 29, 2021. This patch introduced quite a lot of new things. Korthia, City of Secrets, a new zone of daily quests, rares, and collectibles leading into the new 10-boss raid, Sanctum of Domination. A raid featuring battles and story beats involving major lore characters such as Garrosh Hellscream, the Remnant of Ner'zhul, Kel'Thuzad, and a fight against Sylvanas Windrunner herself. This patch also introduced a new mega dungeon, Tazavesh, the Veiled Market, an 8-boss instance with a unique broker theme, which continued to be important in the War Within expansion. 9.1 also added flying to the 4 Covenant zones in Shadowlands, making leveling for alts and general exploration easier, and finally it continued the overall Covenant campaign storylines as well. Besides from the obvious points that Shadowlands was not well received as an expansion overall, and that Blizzard faced a huge scandal regarding their workplace culture shortly after this patch release, 9.1 also arrived after a 7th-month gap from Shadowlands' launch, which was one of the longest waits in WoW's history. Expectations were understandably high, with the patch itself pretty much guaranteed to underdeliver after such a long wait. And underdeliver it did, with an uninspired and repetitive grind in Korthia, where progression was tied to heavy time gating and reputation farming that felt more like busy work than meaningful gameplay. And calling the raid story beats divisive would be an understatement, with many players feeling Sylvanas' sudden redemption arc was unearned, as well as unfortunately and irritatingly predictable. This patch, for many, symbolizes a bit of a breaking point in WoW history, with Blizzard themselves acknowledging that many things needed to change going forward. And at number 3, we have patch 4.3, Hour of Twilight, the largest and final content patch released during Cataclysm on November 29th, 2011. This patch contained the 8-boss raid Dragon Soul, culminating in a sort of battle against Deathwing, as well as 3 new 5-man dungeons, End Time, Well of Eternity, and the Hour of Twilight. Alongside these additions, we also got the LFR tool, allowing players to queue for raids in the same way as the Dungeon Finder system. Transmog was also introduced, fundamentally changing the game in a lot of ways, as well as void storage. Rogues got their Fangs of the Father legendary daggers, Golad, Twilight of the Aspects, and Tyriosh, Nightmare of Ages. And the Darkmoon Fair was completely revamped and moved to Darkmoon Island, with new minigames, rewards, and achievements to boot. The final raid of Cataclysm was anticipated to be epic, but what players actually received was a repetitive and frustrating Spine of Deathwing fight, followed by an anticlimactic Madness of Deathwing ending. A lot of the raid also reused existing environments, such as Dragonblight and Wormrest Temple, instead of creating new exciting settings. And alongside that, we have the entire LFR debate, which still goes on to this day. Before LFR, only a small fraction of players ever saw raid bosses, so this system certainly did improve accessibility. But many raiders felt that it cheapened the raiding experience overall, devaluing their accomplishments. The very forgiving difficulty also potentially encouraged sloppy gameplay, since most mechanics could basically just be ignored completely. Whilst traditional raiding required close-knit guilds and teamwork, LFR also kind of fostered the more impersonal behavior that has become a little bit synonymous with WoW over time, leading to things like AFKing and toxic behavior, due to being mostly anonymous and cross-realm. Early LFR also used a group loot system, which led to rampant ninja looting as well. All in all, patch 4.3's LFR system has created tensions between casual and hardcore players ever since. And at number 2, we have patch 8.3, Visions of N'Zoth. This was the third and final content patch for Battle for Azeroth, released on January 14th, 2020. Including the new 12-boss raid in Iolotha, the Waking City, the original 1-to-5 player horrific vision scenarios and corrupted versions of Stormwind and Orgrimmar, as well as rotating void invasions in Uldum in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. A legendary upgradable cloak, Astra Kamas, which was mandatory to both story and raid progression. The corrupted gear system, which replaced Titan Forging with randomly rolled corruption effects on gear. For example, effects like Expedient, which increase the amount of haste you gain from all sources by either 6, 9, or 12%. We also got Volpera and Mechanome allied races, and last but not least, a major redesign of the auction house interface and functionality. The reason patch 8.3 makes number 2 on this list is mostly down to the corrupted gear system, which is considered to be one of Blizzard's worst gearing experiments. In a nutshell, each piece of gear had a random chance to have a randomly generated corruption effect on it. Although you could visit Mother in the Chamber of Heart to purchase specific effects, those were on a rotating basis. Wearing corrupted items would raise the level of your base corruption, with the net total leading to harmful side effects, such as grasping tendrils at 1 corruption, all the way to inescapable consequences at corruption 200. In order to offset the net total of corruption, you needed to equip and upgrade your Astra Kamas Shroud of Resolve, which involved tedious grinds inside horrific visions. Grinds that had the potential to be extremely punishing due to the fact that you could fail a run, and you needed vessels of horrific visions to even enter them in the first place. The corruption system also led to massive power imbalances due to the frustrating RNG nature, with many players focusing on chasing very specific corruption effects. And the patch itself launched with numerous bugs and lag, only adding to players' frustration further. On top of all of that, the ending of the new raid was extremely lackluster, with the cinematic after N'Zoth's defeat being considered to be one of the worst at that point in time, due to how abruptly it came to a halt and how unsatisfying it left players feeling. Excitement around facing N'Zoth was incredibly high due to it being the only old god left as far as current lore at the time had led us to believe, so players certainly felt underwhelmed by the raid's climax. However, at least this patch did deliver a lot of different features, even if they were poorly designed or poorly received ones, which is more than can be said for the number 1 spot. And that brings us to number 1, the patch 6.1 Garrison Update, the first major patch of Warlords of Draenor released on February 14th, 2015. Introducing fantastic features such as Twitter integration and the selfie camera, as well as updates to the Garrison and Heirloom Collection tab, some graphical improvements to the Blood Elf model along with anti-aliasing and lighting effects. Small profession tweaks, you get the picture. Now, the reason 6.1 is definitely the worst patch in World of Warcraft's history is because it very nearly killed the game entirely. One of the few occasions where the community actually widely agreed this patch added absolutely nothing of value. No raid, no dungeon, no zone, no content. Sure, the selfie camera has its niche uses, but ultimately it became a bit of a running joke, considered a prime example of how Blizzard can sometimes completely lose touch with their own players. Warlords of Draenor already had the reputation of being one of the thinnest expansions in terms of content, and this only solidified the criticism, creating a general feeling that players had been straight up overcharged for the expansion. Not to mention that the Twitter integration was also kind of borked and didn't really work at launch anyway, proving to be yet another misstep with this patch. The game desperately needed a win during WoD, so this patch could not have come at a worse time, and that's why it's placed firmly at number 1.